Two for. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. It's good to be home. Yes? There's many people I'd like to thank, of course, our congregational church here for giving us this space in which, there's something different about when we gather together to read poetry and literature, which is always meant to be the sense of being a communal act, of coming around the proverbial fire to share in our stories together, in which storytelling has always been so important to me. So I'm glad for this space. I'm also glad for Books and Books. And I got to tell you, I grew up as a kid going to Books and Books as a teenager, and always dreaming of someday writing a book and reading at the little small, the one on Aragon Street, right? And I got to tell you that sometimes, Christina, that's what kept me writing. So we all know that Books and Books is more than just a bookstore. It's just part of our very lives and part of our community in one way or shape or another. So thank you to Books and Books as well. And of course I wouldn't, yes, please. Where'd you go? And all the wonderful people there, including our own Mitch Kaplan and everyone that has been there for years. I'm not sure anybody's ever left Books and Books either. And also, of course, FIU. As I was saying, I was saying yesterday with the president, that FIU has been in my life since I was a little kid. I grew up 2 miles away from Huachete, away from riding bike and going to FIU because they had these cool hills, and we would just jump our bikes around there. And I would always ride my bike through there, thinking, who would I be when I grow up? What does the future hold? Who am I? As a child of immigrant exile parents, thinking I didn't know what my possibilities even were. And before you know it, there I was. FIU and the creative writing program, I wouldn't be here today without the instruction of the dedicated faculty, none of which, as Les had said, had left. And it's more than just learning how to write. It was a community. It taught me how to be a writer, how to think about what it is I cared about, what my heart and soul cared about enough to write about. And that was essentially what got me started really on this track to writing. They say in that regard that every writer in some ways is writing the same poem over and over again, in the same way that perhaps every painter is painting the same canvas over and over again. And what that means is that we all have our unique obsession, right? And we revolve around that obsession, and every poem or every story or every canvas is in some way an attempt to dimension that obsession, to think about how we can answer those questions or ask new questions about it. For me, that came at FIU. My very first assignment by Campbell McGrath was write a poem about America. And it's the same assignment that Obama gave me 40 years later. Sorry, I gotta maybe get the hang of this. All right. Did that change? Uh-oh. You think an engineer would be able to figure this out, but of course, I've been rusty this past it. Sorry, guys. There we go. So it's an obsession that, as I learned in Campbell McGrath's class, that really began a long time ago, perhaps before I was even born. As the story goes, and Les said very eloquently, but as I like to do shorthand as a poet, we got to compress things. I was made in Cuba, assembled in Spain, and imported to the United States, which meant my mother left 7 months pregnant from Cuba, and ¿cómo?
Not in China.
No, no made in China, made in Cuba. No China. So my mother left 7 months pregnant, and I was born in Madrid, and 45 days later we immigrated to the United States, first to New York and eventually to Miami when I was very young, which is where the whole memoir takes place, obviously. But it was always an ironic sort of sense to my life as I look back. This is un recordatorio of my birth, which when you come to think about it, that newborn photo was actually, my very first photo was actually my green card photo when we came in. So by the time I was 45 days old, I belonged to 3 countries. You know, I had lived in 2 world-class cities. And so the idea was that in some ways these were things that if there wasn't a higher power source saying, guess what little Ricky's going to grow up and be obsessed about? This whole idea of question of home. Where do I belong? What is place? What is our connection to place? How do we understand that? How do we connect to that? And that obsession continued with then moving to Miami. And moving to Miami, as we all know in this room pretty much, you know, it was like growing up between 2 imaginary worlds. There was this kind of Cuba. It was the Cuba of our parents and our grandparents, that wonderful place where the mangoes, los mangos eran más dulce, you know. The mangoes were sweeter, the sugar was sweeter, the salt was saltier, and Miami Beach was a landfill, like Varadero. There's nothing like Varadero. Come on now, you know. And so, but it was this wonderful sort of place that I was from, but I had never been there. So it was real and imagined. And the other place that was sort of real and imagined that is not so obvious perhaps, or maybe is obvious for us, is America. As I think the Pulitzer Prize winner, Liz Balmaceda said, we love living in Miami because it's so close to the United States, you know, and you don't need a passport. It's like free reign. But we all know that growing up here, whether you are Cuban or not, you know that Miami's a special place. Miami's a very special, unique place in that sense. And really, America did feel like this other real imagined place, this other place that maybe we'd go to someday. And it was kind of a waiting ground, sort of a cultural purgatory, thinking, well, maybe we'll go to Cuba, maybe someday we'll move to Connecticut. I'm not sure what's going on, but something will happen. And that's kind of what's been obsessing me all my life. And since I was a little kid, this idea of where does one belong and what is home? And it's a question that we all ask ourselves in some way, shape, or another. But it was especially prevalent and significant for us in Miami. It still is, because I think Miami is such an amazing city because of the way that we're still trying to figure all that out. And we're still trying to find exactly what our home means to us and how that works in a very gregarious and a very very holistic way as to how and what Miami means to us. But in any case, that was my childhood. And that was how I grew up, growing up between those 2 worlds. And that's where this memoir sort of takes its cue from. It's much like the poetry, but unlike the poetry that I've been writing, the memoir allows me to unpack all the poems that I had written. So really, sort of the memoir is really the first half of my very first book, because there were so many backstories and cheapness that I couldn't tell in the poetry that I wanted to sort of unveil. But that is still a sort of psychological background. One of the other ways, besides the Brady Bunch, that I contextualized America, like thinking everything north of Miami was the Brady Bunch and a Brady Bunch house and all the rest, was Winn-Dixie. El Winn-Dixie. And smack dab in the middle of Guachetan, there was a Winn-Dixie, which still exists, which it was like going into Satan territory when we were growing up. It was like this thing that you would just not go to because we spent our lives going to all the Cuban bodegas, right? So one of the ways I mystified America, or the way that America that I wanted besides television, was food and was Winn-Dixie, the things you couldn't get at the Cuban bodegas. And this little excerpt from the very first chapter deals with that. It would also introduce my grandmother, who is the female in that photo. And you should notice how she's clutching her pocketbook very closely. You'll notice how I'm looking away from her. And I won't say who my brother is because he's in the room, but I think you can figure that out. that ever wonderful 70s look. And my father and my grandfather. So here we are, me and my grandmother was this incredible character throughout the book. She was my enemy. She was my best friend. She was my teacher. She was my detractor. She's the smartest woman I ever met, the dumbest woman I ever met. She was the most generous woman I ever met, the cheapest woman I ever met in my world. You know what I'm talking about? So here we are. So this is me and my grandmother sort of in cahoots, sort of. So every day after Abuela and Abuelo would pick me up from school, she'd chase after specials on name brands and daily specials at one of 3 Cuban bodegas she frequented. Abuelo would pull his lawn chair from the trunk, camp under a palm tree in the bodega parking lot, smoking a cigar and reading a Spanish translation of a dime store western in the shade while he waited. Abuela would tuck her beaded coin purse in her brassiere, a tip she had picked up from the New York Puerto Ricanas, who had taught her how to guard her cash against would-be muggers. She'd march into the store du jour, bouncing in her crepe-soled orthopedic shoes with me in tow. Some days we went to La Sorpresita, the little surprise, not surprisingly the smallest of the 3 bodegas. Some days we went to El Gallo de Oro. There you go. And here's the great English translation of that, the golden cock, which I was tempted to name the book that at one time, and thought, won't work. Where the Cuban bread was 10 cents cheaper than any place else, and other days we went to La Caridad, named after the patroness of Cuba, Our Lady of Charity, the neon virgin flashing halo above the canopy, so lifelike, Abuela would insist I make the sign of the cross before going in. And every single week, I would beg Abuela to take me to Winn-Dixie instead, but she refused to set foot in the place. There's none of our food in El Winn-Dixie. Only los Americanos shop there. Abuela sneered. It's too expensive anyway, she complained, dismissing my pleas until the day she spotted a Winn-Dixie circular in the mail advertising a special too tempting for Abuela to ignore. Whole roasted chickens, its drumsticks crowned with fancy paper hats, and a banner beneath trumpeting its not-so-fancy price. Whole fryers, 29 cents per pound. What does whole fryers mean? Abuela asked me. Pollo entero, I translated. De verdad? She said incredulously. There's nothing like reading to a Miami audience, I'm sorry. It's just like, I don't have to explain. At La Caridad, I paid 34 cents on a special. I played on her piqued curiosity. Sí, Abuela, it's a great price for chicken. Increíble. You sure could save a lot of money. She agreed and left the circular on the kitchen counter instead of tossing it out with the rest of the junk mail that came in English. Few things intimidated Abuela. Among these were black magic Santeria and Americanos. As for Americanos, Abuela wouldn't go anywhere she perceived to be wholly American, at least not alone. This included the Social Security office downtown, any restaurant with English-only menus, fancy department stores like Burdine's, and definitely not Winn-Dixie. But Abuela couldn't resist a bargain. The following week, the chicken appeared in the mail at 26 cents per pound, 3 cents cheaper than the week before, and then 24 cents the week after that. The fryers haunted Abuela. Her stinginess slowly overcame her fear of Americanos until finally she broke. Mijo, will you go with me shopping at a Winn-Dixie mañana? She half asked, half commanded. Of course, Abuela. No te preocupes, I'll go with you. Soon, I dreamed our pantry would be stocked with Crunchberry cereals and Oreo cookies. Our freezer stuffed with Swanson TV dinners and Eskimo pies. Our fridge filled with Hawaiian punch and American cheese. The next day after school, Abuela instructed Abuela to drive to El Winn-Dixie instead of La Caridad. A giant neon sign marked its entrance, the letters spelling out Winn-Dixie, the beef people. seeming to glow even in the daylight. What does the beef people mean? Abuela questioned me. I struggled for a translation that would make sense, but none did. La gente de carne. I finally offered, ¿Cómo? How can that be? Abuela said, perplexed by the thought of people made of meat. Why not the pollo people or the carne puerco people? She amused herself. Abuela tore the advertisement for the fryer from the flyer and stuffed it into her brassiere, then kissed Abuelo goodbye as if we might not return. Dios nos ampare, God be with us, she muttered. She said nothing until we reached the store entrance. Now take me straight to Los Pollos and no talking to anyone. We don't belong here. The electric doors yawned open. I reached for a shopping cart twice as big as the ones at La Caridad, but Abuela tugged me back, saying, don't you dare, with her eyes wide open, too anxious to speak. I could barely speak myself, not from fear, but from pure awe. I was finally in Winn-Dixie. The air-conditioned air smelled crisp and clean as Lysol. Each of the 10 checkout lines was numbered with an illuminated sign, and the cashiers all wore polyester uniforms. Instead of warped squares of linoleum, polished terrazzo floors gleamed, and soft violin music rained from the speakers in the ceiling. I was finally in America. We stepped into the produce section full of fruits and vegetables. I had never eaten or even heard of Brussels sprouts, squash, tangelos, apricots. Brussels sprouts, squash, tangelos, apricots. I kept pronouncing their name in my mind, trying to imagine the taste from the sound of them. Pretending I was looking for the chickens, I deliberately wove Abuela through every aisle, taking it all in. The cartoon faces of the cereal boxes I'd only seen on TV. I kept the frost like snow on the freezer cases, flavors of Jell-O I never knew existed, raspberry, black cherry, lime. Soup made from cheddar cheese? From potatoes? From broccoli? I wanted to buy and taste everything I saw. But of all the things I had tried at Jimmy Dawson's house, one of the 3 Americanos in my class, my absolute favorite was easy cheese. And there, in the snack aisle, I saw it. Can you buy me this, Abuela? I asked, grabbing the can off the shelf. ¿Qué es eso? What's that? She asked. It's queso, Abuela. Queso americano. Please, it's my favorite, I begged. What? Queso en una lata? She questioned, unable to fathom the idea of cheese in a can, but I could tell from the tone of her voice that she was intrigued. Look, I said, spraying a dab on my finger and licking it off, you don't even need to put it in the refrigerator. She looked at me and my finger, at me and my finger, at the can, at me, at my finger. ¿Qué cosa? Como inventan los americanos. I've been waiting 20 years to be able to write that line, all right? She marveled at the ingenuity of Americans. Let me taste, she said, holding out her index finger. Ay, qué rico, she paused, and then questioned, pero how much is it? Taking the can from my hand to look at the price. $1.35. Bueno, okay, but only if you promise to eat it all. I don't want to be wasting food, but let's get a fresh one, mijo, she said. putting the can back on the shelf and taking a new one. And let me tell you, that's universal, as I've been reading, like cross-cultural, cross-sexuality, cross-continental. Somehow, nobody takes that first can. So here we are at the checkout counter at a Winn-Dixie. We plop down all 10 of our chickens and easy cheese on the conveyor. The cashier was polite and American, no doubt, judging from her name tag, Beatrice, not the Spanish Beatriz. After ringing up 2 chickens, Beatrice paused. "I'm sorry, are you together?" she asked. "Yes," I answered. "Well, you can only take 2 chickens," she said. "I'm sorry." Knowing something had gone wrong, Abuela got panicky. She reached into her brassiere and pulled out the flyer from her coin purse. "Chicken, chicken, 24 cents, chicken." She began rambling before I had a chance to translate. "Chicken, chicken," she continued, pointing at the photo of the fryer. Beatrice showed her the fine print that read, "Limit 2 per customer." But Abuela didn't care. "Chicken. 24 cents, chicken, special, chicken," she repeated. Growing impatient, Beatrice reached for the public address mic and paged the manager. "Mr. Quigley, to register 5. Mr. Quigley, register 5, please." I was mortified. Finally, becoming aware of the scene she was making, Abuela piped down and I was able to explain the situation. "Qué cabrones. Qué barbaridad," she complained. "Bueno, está bien. Okay, we take this one and this one," she said, looking sadly at the 8 chickens left on the conveyor. "What about this?" Beatrice asked, holding the can of easy cheese. "Yes," I yelled, "but Abuela Bart, I'm not buying nothing else here." She paid with exact change and we whisked ourselves away with our 2 chickens. Esos americanos de mierda. And their rules, trying to trick me. "This is worse than Cuba." She grumbled all the way back to the car, slamming the door. "¿Qué pasó?" Abuelo asked. Nada, chico. Let's go to La Calidad. I'm never coming back here again. Pa la mierda with these beefy people," she shouted as Abuelo drove away. Now what? I thought. Now what? That's not the last of the easy cheese and the Winn-Dixie you'll see in the store, but there's a lot more characters and adventures. At one point I wanted a working title for the book was Huckleberry Blanco, or Running with Mangoes, or one of those kinds of things. But it really is a series of adventures and misadventures as Ricky's trying to find his mythic America, little Ricky as I call myself, trying to find his sort of mythic America. And each chapter also focuses on special relationships with people, in the sense of, that's where the sort of the Prince title gets its name from, this idea that it takes a village, right? That it takes a village to raise a child. And so each chapter focuses on some particular relative or another kind of relationship that's very special to me. So I'd like to take a pause now and just sort of show you some of those characters. One, which my mother's probably like embarrassed right now, but one, of course, is my mother. So what I want you to notice, this is obviously a photo of her from Cuba, and that bag that she's holding in that's a very lightweight version of her 80-pound Por si las moscas bag. That bag that had everything from Band-Aids to mosquito repellent to toilet paper, in part because she always wanted me to be prepared, but in part because we were a working class family. You didn't have to buy anything anywhere. You took it with you, you know. Including the pistol that she took on the way to Disney World, because in case we were attacked by a band of crazy Americans. But what I did realize about my mother in writing the book was that her response to that kind of my mother's like this really like sort of We used to call her La Jefa, La Capitana. She ran the whole household. And she's not like that in my poetry, and I'm going to read a poem shortly about her. But in writing the memoir, I realized that what it was a psychological response. My mother left every single living relative that she knew in her life in Cuba for the sake of my brother and me, for the sake of a better life. And I realize now that control freakness was a response to say, I can't lose anything else in my life. I have to hold on to what I have. I can't do that anymore. And so in writing the memoir as opposed to the poetry, I realized that's why my mom was like La Jefa, she just wanted everything to go smoothly from that point forward. And so I'll read a poem, you'll see that in the memoir, but I read a poem, and one of the first moments that I realized where my mother was coming from, where my mother's soul was really from. And the poetry is really weird because the poetry zeroes in like the individual. The memoir takes a longer time, but there's all these wonderful stories that go along with it. But it takes a longer time to sort of get into that character, and that's the beauty of memoir as well, that you can see the surface character as well, the underneath character. But that moment I first saw my mother's soul was actually, again, at a Cuban bodega, and this is it. It's called Mother Picking Produce. She scratches the oranges, then smells the peel, presses an avocado just enough to judge its ripeness, polishes the Macintoshes, searching for bruises. She selects with hands that have thickened, fingers that have swollen with history around the white gold of a wedding ring she now wears as a widow. Unlike the archived photos of young, slender digits captive around black and white orange blossoms, her spotted hands now reach into the colors. I see all the folklore of her childhood, the fields, the fruit she once picked from the very tree, the wiry roots she pulled out of the very ground. And now, among collapsed boxes of yucca, through cumberling pyramids of mangoes, she moves with the same instinct and skill. This is how she survives death and her son on these humble duties that will never change, on those habits of living which keep a life a life. She holds up red grapes to ask me what I think, and what I think is this, a new poem about her. The grapes looked like dusty rubies in her hands. But what I say is this, they looked sweet, Mama, very sweet. There's actually three characters in this slide. One of them is my father. One of them is me in a Mickey Mouse shirt, which I either had 10 of them or I just kept wearing it over and over again, obsessed, which is chapter 4. It's called El Ratoncito Miguel. It's my first trip to Disney World. It's like I was obsessed with Mickey Mouse. And then there's a third character called El Malibu. Which was my dad's first car in the new world, in the new country, symbol of the American dream, et cetera, et cetera. And as my mother and my brother and most of it would testify, he paid more attention to that car than most of us. And I think my dad in The Prince of those Cocuyos is kind of that quiet, strong, somehow emotionally present but not emotionally expressive man that I think a lot of us have grown up with. Part of that, I'm not sure where it comes from. Part of it, he was raised by my grandmother, so I'm not sure. But he was a great and wonderful man, a quiet man. And I think we all know a father like that in somewhere. So this is a poem of him in that quiet state, this sort of space where he comes from. And in the book, when he says something that really matters. And a lot of my writing is an attempt to sort of recreate him, to really understand him and the life that he was feeling beyond just what he said. This is called Shaving. I'm not shaving. I'm writing about it. And I conjured the most elaborate idea how my beard is a creation of silent labor, like ocean steam rising to form clouds, or the bloom of spider webs each morning, the discreet mystery of how whiskers grow, like the drink roses take from the vase, or the fall of fresh rain becoming a river, and then rain again, so silently. I think of all those slow and silent forces and how quickly my father's life passed us by. I think of those mornings when I am shaving and remember him in a masquerade of foam. Then, as if it was his beard I took the blade to. The memory of him in tiny snips of black whiskers swirling in the drain. Dead pieces of the self from the face that never taught me how to shave. His legacy of whiskers that grow like black seeds sown over my cheek and chin, my own flesh. I'm not shaving, but I will tell you about the mornings with a full beard and the blade in my hand, when my eyes don't recognize themselves in a mirror echoed with 100 faces I have washed and shaved. It is in that split second when perhaps the roses drink and the clouds form, when perhaps the spider spins and rain transforms, that I most understand the invisibility of life and the intensity of vanishing, like steam at the slick edges of a mirror without a single trace. So, another character in the book is my brother Caco, and he's 6.5 years older than me, and I like the 6.5, although he looks younger than me nowadays. But I think that's exactly the perfect age to have the worst age to have children apart in some ways. For this, we would fight like dogs. I mean, it was just like we had fun fighting, didn't we? I mean, it's like just not exactly the right age to be together. But he's my hero. He's my nemesis. He's my superhero. The book is dedicated to him. He's the man who has taught me most about my life inadvertently without even trying to. And this is him on one of our trips to Disney World. And it's really weird because I gave him the book to read before because I was like, he comes across as a little bit of a pain in the butt. So I said, if you're all right with this, but I realized I'm really the pain in the butt in the book. But it's really just that sort of brotherly thing. And the fact, like in this picture, I used to insist that we dress together just to bug him. And everything is like, my mother would be, ay, a niño, like, and I was like, I still pull it every once in a while, but you know. So this is a poem from my brother and our relationship that I think the remnants of it, the beginnings of it, are in as all brothers, and anybody that has a sibling and has a brother knows that it's one of the greatest loves that you can ever have in your life. And so this is way after, but something that began in the Prince of Los Cocuyos. This is when he visits me up in Maine. I don't ski. My brother does. My brother on Mount Barker. As I write these lines, he is somewhere gliding down the mountain, and I'm here on the ground. Funny. That's the way it's always been. Me looking up at him conquering mountains, secretly wishing I could be as daring as he, less like me. 10 winters and I still haven't learned how to ski. And yet there he is, a man from Florida, weaving through slopes, forever the athlete defying gravity, and me, feet on the ground, asking, what makes us brothers? Blood is not enough to explain this handful of memories, tethering us back to the years we took building that village train set, and the day we set it on fire in the backyard, because we could, because we wanted to watch how the world we created could burn. Or maybe we've not been brothers at all. Not until this morning when I see him cross his skis and tumble down to me, then get up and dust the snow off his jacket. Damn, my bones are killing me, he says. And I realize he doesn't know how to ski that good. Maybe he doesn't know much more than I do about what makes living worth falling. Suddenly I feel I should tell him everything is going to be all right, that he's still young, handsome enough to find a wife unlike the first, that Lucas and Dominic will learn to live in 2 homes, keep loving him more than we could ever love our Father. But I know, he doesn't need me to say such things, so I don't. He needs me to believe them silently, the same way I need him to believe that someday, maybe next year, I'll learn how to ski, and we will glide down the mountain together. So there's actually another 2 characters. You can tell which of these 2 activities Ricky liked best. Easiest SAT question you'll ever have. One of the other characters in the book is the cat, my cat Misu. For some reason, and vouch for me here, why is it that all Cubans name every single cat Misu? I had 18 cats, they're all named Misu. I don't understand that. So that's Misu number 1. And of course, I just put, he's my best friend in many ways in the book, as are animals, but also because my grandmother, which you'll meet in the next excerpt a little bit more, or the one after that, my grandmother was really homophobic, a loving and homophobic woman, but cats were so gay to her, los gatos. So cosa maricón, like, los gaticos, they're like, nah. So I put the cat in the book just to get back at her. Like, it's just the cat sort of follows me throughout the book. So that's my gatico. And me play and me and my little league at Flagami. We all know Flagami, right? And then another character in the book, which was really part of what I really wanted to share with you today, is one of the big motivations about writing the book was Miami as a character. It's everyone in this room. It's everyone not in this room. It's the idea of celebrating who we are as a community, who we are, that special place in our lives that is Miami. And that was a really big motivation about writing the book. And the Miami of our Miami, the Miami of the past, the Miami of the future perhaps, but the ways, again, my same obsession about home and place and identity. What are our relationships to this? So you'll recognize some of these, I think. You'll definitely know Frankie's Pizza, I think, if you grew up in Westchester. E Bodini. Wolfie's, and I'll read an excerpt about that. The Tropicare Flea Market on Bird Road. You got to go back a little while for that, but yeah. Now it's like a Best Buy or something like that, yeah. This is known in our family, this photo. It's the Miss America pageant photo. And we used to take, and that's obviously me at the beach, And a couple of those. El Farito, when there were pines. The last chapter of the book is called El Farito, when the pine trees hadn't gone away. And how amazing is that we have that special place in our lives. Everyone does, but that we can't separate ourselves from our city, from who we are, from our landscapes, because that is who we are. That all has a relationship that fascinates me. But this little excerpt has to do with a staycation. Long before staycation became like a term. Isn't it even a reality show now, that staycation thing? Like, our staycations were because we had no money. Like, it was like, my dad would still be working. We'd go to a hotel like in South Beach in July when it was really cheap. And my dad would sometimes come after work. He wouldn't even take vacation off. And in there I met a very special character, a Jewish woman named Yera. And she taught me a lot about the Miami Beach that even came before me. And this idea of how place and identity are always a relationship that continuously evolves. The Miami that we know today is not that we knew of yesterday is not the Miami of today. That's not a bad thing. It's not a great thing. It's not a good thing. It just is what it is. It's part of the perpetual condition of being human, that we're constantly relating and negotiating our identity in relation to place and what that means. How do we define ourselves from the outside in and from the inside out? So here's a little excerpt from Yera that I meet in one of those staycations at the Copacabana, which I tried to do research on it. I couldn't find any photos of it. I don't know if they changed the name, but we know there was a Copacabana. Ironically, great name for the story, but so here's Yera and Wolfie's. As we continued walking, she explained that Lincoln Road was a people mall, a street for shopping, eating, whatnot, the place to see and be seen with Henry and her when they were a young couple. But now look at it. Oy, what a dump. Isn't it? She said. And she was right. Everything looked as run down as the Copa. The storefront awnings faded and tattered from years of sun and rain, the concrete walks crumbling like chalk, and weeds growing taller than the unkept shrubs in the landscape islands. All the store windows looked grimy, filled with old mannequins with broken fingers and dressed in fuddy-duddy clothes. There was an eerie sensation of emptiness all through Lincoln Road, and loneliness I couldn't explain, only felt in the conspicuous silence. But Yera filled in the blanks with her memories. I caught glimpses of just how glamorous it must have been back in her time. The coral stone fountain still trickling in front of the glass doors of the former Saks Fifth Avenue, where Yera used to shop when things were good. The empty corner storefront of the former Cadillac dealership where she and Harry had brought their first fancy car. And everywhere, the timeless royal palms like indestructible columns standing as straight as ever. Let's go to lunch at Wolfie's. We're hungry, she said, speaking for both of us. And we turned off Lincoln Road at the next corner. From a couple of blocks away, I could see the giant marquee, Wolfie's, spelled out in cursive letters made of strands of neon lit up even during the day. We took a seat at the counter, which looked ancient. Wolfie's was teeming with people mostly Yera's age or older. She handed me one of the menus pinched between the napkin holder and the ketchup bottle on the counter. The liverwurst is to die for, she said. Liver was gross enough, but liverwurst? Was that the worst part of the liver? I scanned the menu, pastrami, lox, blintzes, and a slew of other foods I'd never heard of, finally finding something I could pronounce and loved, a grilled cheese sandwich. The waitress in white nurse-like shoes was slim and with graying hair, cut short and close so that you could make out the shape of her head. Of course, she and Yera knew each other. The usual, Yera, she asked, moistening her index finger with her tongue to turn the page on the order pad. A Reuben and a bowl of borscht, Yetta confirmed, and then turned to me. What are you going to have? Try the borscht. You'll love it, Yetta insisted. After she explained, to my horror, that borscht was beet soup served cold. I declined and asked for a grilled cheese sandwich, no tomatoes. Okay then, Yetta said to the waitress. A Reuben, a grilled cheese, 2 Cokes, and 2 bowls of borscht. Before I could protest, she assured me, trust me, it's to die for. As we waited for our food, Yetta explained that all the celebrities used to eat at Wilfried's. It was hard to believe Yetta's claim, but there was proof on the walls, which were covered with framed photos of ladies in strapless cocktail dresses with diamond hair combs and men in double-breasted jackets smoking and having fancy cocktails in the same booths that surrounded us. So why don't the stars come here anymore? I asked. Yetta sighed and explained, oh, that was in the 50s, darling. Miami Beach is now kaput. What with all the drugs and the mafia, it's a shame, I tell you. People go to the fancy resorts nowadays, everything changes, and not for the better so much. Look at me, one day, 24 years old with a 24-inch waist and bazongas out to here, hobnobbing with the celebrities, and the next day I'm an old Michiganer sitting here telling you dumb stories. Like you care. You've met Yetta. Remember this, darling. Remember this, bubbly. Change can't be changed. One day, when you're old like me, and look at the world not like it is, but like it was, you'll know what this means. I couldn't grasp what she meant, but I felt it. It was the same emptiness I felt on Lincoln Road, the same loneliness I saw in the eyes of the old folks sitting at the Copa, lost in time. The same undertow of sadness pulling at my parents whenever they spoke about their lives back in Cuba, like New York City, Miami Beach, Yetta's Miami Beach, suddenly became a place I had never been to either. I like your stories, Yetta, I assured her. You can tell me all the stories you want. I'd like to read a poem, eventually what Yetta said, one day, change is the only thing you can count on, right? And that happened years later, of course, coming back to Miami. And this doesn't take place in Miami, but in Marco Island. And I think this is self-explanatory. Looking for the Gulf Motel. There should be nothing here I don't remember. The Gulf Motel with mermaid lampposts and ship's wheel in the lobby should still be rising out of the sand like a cake decoration. My brother and I should still be pretending we don't know our parents, embarrassing us as they roll the luggage cart past the front desk, loaded with our scruffy suitcases, 24 loaves of Cuban bread, brown bags bulging with enough mangoes to last the entire week, our espresso pot, the pressure cooker, and a pork roast reeking garlic through the marble lobby. All because we can't afford to eat out, mijo. Not even on vacation. Only 2 hours from our home in Miami, but far enough away to be thrilled by the wider sands on the west coast of Florida, where I should still be for the first time watching the sun set instead of rise over the ocean. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My mother should still be in the kitchenette of the Gulf Motel, her daisy sandals from Kmart squeaking across the linoleum, still gorgeous in her teal swimsuit and amber earrings, stirring a pot of arroz con pollo, adding sprinkles of onion powder and dollops of tomato sauce. My father should still be in a terry cloth jacket, smoking, clinking a glass of amber whiskey in the sunset at the Golf Motel, watching us dive into the pool, 2 sons he'll never see grow into men who will be proud of him. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother and I should still be playing parcheesi. My father should still be alive. Slow dancing with my mother on the sliding glass balcony of the Golf Motel. No music, only the waves keeping time. A song only their minds hear 10,000 nights back to their life in Cuba. My mother's face should still be resting against his bare chest, like the moon resting on the sea and the stars. The stars should still be turning around them. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother should still be 13, sneaking rum in the bathroom and sculpting naked women from sand. And I should still be 8 years old, dazzled by seashells and how many seconds I can hold my breath underwater. But I'm not. I'm 38, driving up Collier Boulevard, looking for the Golf Motel, for everything that should still be, but isn't. I want to blame the condos, their shadows for ruining the beach and my past. I want to chase the snowbirds away with their tacky McMansions and yachts. I want to turn the golf courses back into mangroves. I want to find the Golf Motel exactly as it was and pretend for just a moment that nothing I've lost is lost. Thank you. I hate to say it, don't give a Cuban a microphone. We got about 5 minutes. Is that all right? All right. This is a Cocuyo. This is a Cocuyo, as if you needed to know in South Florida, but that's a Cocuyo. It's a kind of, it's the equivalent of a firefly. It's technically a beetle, but this is thanks to my tia Postiza Mati, who caught one not recently. And the weird thing, I was debating whether to write the book, and they caught one, and then the next night I'm walking up because in the 70s when we were growing up, they were all over the place, and I happened to be walking up, and there was one inside like one of the bushes, and I was like, I got to name the book this. But their eyes, instead of their butts, their eyes light up, which I think is a little less vulgar, but that's what it is. And the name of the book, the book takes its name from this for several reasons. One is that magic of fireflies. Number two is that I've named this grocery store, my grand uncle's grocery store at Cocuyito, which is this place where I started working when I was 12. And part of the magic of that is the other countercurrent in the book is Ricky's sort of learning about his mythic America. He wants easy cheese, he wants Ritz crackers, he wants to be Marsha Brady, he wants all these things. But what happens along the way inadvertently is that he learns how to be Cuban. And I think this is something why I wanted to write the story, because I don't think that people understand that as the middle generation, you don't grow up like, oh, I just love dancing quinces and going to and I just love eating pork on Thanksgiving. We have an automatic sort of rejection of our initial culture because it's what your parents do, and that's tacky, picudo, ¿qué es eso? That's not cool, And it was really, the book is about falling in love or learning about the richness and the reality of my Cuban heritage and my Cuban birthright, and the reality beyond that the mangoes were better and all that stuff, the reality of it. And that happened at a very special place in my life, which is where I started working since I was 12. It started happening earlier, but it was really the grocery store where I learned how to be Cuban. I learned to fall in love with my Cubanidad. I learned I also learned that what I thought was this mythic America was also a myth, but I also looked beyond what the talk on the street of Baradero and all this stuff to really understand what my culture meant. And that happens at El Cocuyito, which is the name of the store in the book. And so there's a couple of I'm sorry. It's very emotional to be here with you guys in this, but this is a store. This is my grand uncle. I've changed names in the story to like not protect everybody and all the rest. So I won't say what his name is in the story, otherwise he is just a very amazing person in my life. And this is a picture of the store, and you can see the colors and the sights and the sounds and the textures and the smells of what I was encountered with. A man who taught me about Cuba in a different way, who taught me what it meant to be Cuban in a different way, a way I had never heard of before. And so this is a little bit of a story of how I started working at El Cocuyito, which of course is not as sentimental. It has to do back with my grandmother, so get ready to laugh, all right? My grandmother plotted the whole incident. When I was younger, I was a finicky eater. You look like un gargajo. A piece of phlegm, skinny and frail like a woman. Los hombres need to eat, Abuela insisted, and began fattening me up with a concoction of sweetened condensed milk mixed with Coca-Cola. All the easy cheese I wanted, double portions of rice and frijoles negros at dinner, mandatory desserts. But now that I was 20 pounds overweight, she was mortified. Bad enough being a sissy, but a fat sissy? Que va. You have to lose all that gordura. And so began her campaign to slim me down. She made me ride bike 10 times around the block every day after school and roller skate twice a week up and down the front walkway wrapped in garbage bags so I could sweat the flat out. She even agreed to my request for a pogo stick, just like the one my cousin Marlene had, after I convinced her that pogoing was good exercise. Although she immediately cut the plastic tassels from the handlebars because they were too gay. She banned all my favorite foods, the same foods she used to fatten me up into her little machito. After weeks of watching Abuela torment me, Mama spoke up, albeit with caution. Bueno, he's not that fat, she told Abuela. He's more como husky, she said, mispronouncing the word that she had learned from the husky section of the boys' department at Kmart, where she brought all my husky clothes. I was looking forward to that summer, running errands all day with my abuelos in their baby blue Comet that smelled like oranges, playing Aquaman in Tio Ophelia's swimming pool, watching The Price is Right and reruns of I Love Lucy all afternoon, sitting on the couch in my underwear, munching on Ritz crackers and Easy Cheese. But that all changed a week before school let out. What Ricky needs is hard work, un trabajo. That will make him un hombre. He's old enough. It's time, Abuela announced at dinner, speaking to my parents about me in the third person as if I wasn't sitting across from her. Además, she continued, working, he will lose all that weight so that his pee-pee will grow. These are the times that you wish you were lying in a memoir, and there's no embellishment there. You know, if he doesn't lose all that fat before he turns 13, his pee-pee will shrivel up. It'll become nada. I gulped. My pee-pee shriveled right then and there. Except for Caco choking on his food as he tried to stifle his laughter, complete silence followed Abuela's announcement. She shoved another mound of black beans and rice into her fork with her pudgy thumb, stuffed it in her mouth, and continued talking with her mouth full. Remember what happened to Juan el Bobo back in Cuba? I warned his mother, pero she didn't listen. Then it was too late. He had to have an operation, and they still couldn't pull it out. There was always some character, Abuela knew, in some town in Cuba who served as a perfect example of some good or bad fortune. She continued with her plan. Ya hablé con Don Gustavo, and he'll let you help out in el Cocuyito all summer for $55 a week. Then delivered her ultimatum. He goes to work, or si no, he goes back to baseball at Flagami. No, anything but baseball, I thought, flashing back to those dreadful 98-degree afternoons in left field, shooing away gnats and terrified of fire ants, the fly balls I could never catch, and the booze every time I struck out at bat. I hated baseball, and Abuela knew it. She knew I wouldn't object to working at El Cocuyito, given the alternative. When I was a young child, before Abuela had moved to Miami and could babysit me on weekends, my parents had to take me with them every Saturday and Sunday to El Cocuyito, where they worked at the time, he as a butcher and she as a cashier. I'd spend the day playing hide-and-go-seek by myself, crouching behind dusty boxes stacked like giant toy blocks in the storeroom, or chasing the old guard dog, Napoleon, as he limped through the stockroom. When there were no customers at the checkout, Mama would plop me on the conveyor belt, my magic rubber carpet. When Don Gustavo went home for lunch, Papa would let me wear his white smocks and that reached to my ankles like a dress. He would take me into the meat locker, a room full of death and bitter cold that somehow also was magical. The hanging sides of beef towering over me like dinosaurs in the museum. The bags of frozen cow tongues as big as my arm, my breaths floating away like tiny clouds, which I followed in awe until they disappeared. And Cocuyito was a magical part of my childhood. And despite the reasons for my employment, I looked forward to working there. Just a couple more characters and scenes from the story, which you'll see later in the book. But this is my dear Gloria, who becomes my buddy in the store. Although Don Gustavo thinks he runs the store, it's really Tia Mira who's like running the store. She's like she's the matriarchal, powerful figure. And her and me become really good buddies. She's a woman who taught me taught me the real meaning of dignity, of respect, of honor, of work in ways that no one else had done. And she's one of the most special people in my life. But the thing is, we were both oddballs, right? None of us fit the stereotype. she wasn't walking around in like heels or doing like, she didn't have her nails done. And I, of course, did not fit the bill as the machito, you know. And we made a great couple and a great team. And I think we understood each other in ways that we've never even talked about. And then there was just other little scenes. I don't know if you can see that far, but compared to the Winn-Dixie in a Cocuyito, you didn't get those neat hands that were gloved, and the meat suddenly appeared from behind those sliding glass doors. And in Cocuyito, they give you a slab of beef, and they're like, "You like this one?" And they slice it right up in you. This is one of the cashiers in there, and I'm not sure if you can see, but she's holding this avocado as if she's about to make love to it. This is how much Cubans love fruit, right? Like, it's this thing. And I'd like to put that in case there's anybody from California here. That's an avocado, all right? And of course, every Cuban store had to have una cafeteria, and this is a cafeteria, and where I gotta say, still addicted to Cuban coffee and pastelitos, so that's where it all started. It was like, that's what happened, you know? So I just wanted to show you, as you read the book, that I hope some of these images come back to you. In the end, I'd like to say just a couple of things. One is that, we're all amongst family here, entre familia, no? We understand the story, I think, whether you're Cuban or not, but just being in Miami, that it's very much a story of, it's a cultural coming of age story, but it's so much more than that to me. In the fact that you can't really separate, none of us can really separate the different stories that make us, right? So, you know, there's so many hats after the inauguration, gay this, like Latino this, immigrant that, first guy with bushy eyebrows, whatever the case may be. And the fact is that we become all those things at the same time, that you can't separate. And what I became interested in this book is that you can't separate those stories, that all those stories come together. Oh, thanks, thank you. That all those stories come together. And that I can't separate who I am as that little Mickey Mouse kid, or my mother trying to show me something about Jose Marti, who I am with my partner, who I am from an engineer, who I am as an American or as a Cuban, who I am as an engineer or as a poet, that all those things happen simultaneously. And if we look deep into our lives, and if we think about it, each one of us has that unique recipe, and we're constantly becoming human beings. It doesn't stop at 10, it doesn't stop at 17, it doesn't stop at 27. Just when you think you got it all figured out, but you have grandchildren, and you suddenly have a new negotiation of who you think you are. And the idea, the real, for me, the universal aspect of this book is that humans, one of the fundamental functions or activities of human is to always be becoming. We constantly are becoming. And it's like this mirage that's down the road. And just when you think you're there and you think you know who you are, it slips a few feet away from you. And you're like, let's go there. Let's try and figure that out. And we spend our whole life chasing after ourselves, chasing after who we already are. And I think that's the ultimate sort of wonderful thing about the book. And one last thing, and I'll end on the poem, that you kind of read this book knowing that that little Husky kid that grew up behind Bird Bowl, who, with the crazy grandma, you know, and all the rest, was a stock boy, and like, that he grows up to do this. But the irony is, and what this book is about, that I could only do this because of this. That who I am and what this book is about has to do as much as my family or everybody in this room and beyond. That the sense that our communities are what make us who we are. And I can't imagine anything else more true in terms of everything from books and books to FIU, which I consider family and a community, to my family in the bookstore, in the grocery store, to all my neighbors, to everyone I've ever bought a pastelito from. You know, it's all goes into the making. And so what the basic, most wonderful and best gift of the inauguration for me was not meeting Beyonce. It was a sense that I think we all share in Miami in some way, that In some ways, in Miami, we always feel we're a little bit the other. In some ways, always. We're like, oh, we're not quite that other thing. But to realize that my story, all our stories, my mother's story, a woman who grew up in a dirt floor home in Cuba, that all these stories of so many people that I grew up around with is the American, or not just the American story, but a grand and wonderful part of the American story, and has always been and will continue to be. And the greatest gift of the inauguration was that realization to know that I was home, that our experiences here in Miami as Latinos, as Latinophiles, as Latino lovers, as Latino adoptees, as all the rest, is very much part of this grand story of this country. And so I'll just share that poem with you, and we'll close. In the moment, I feel America standing as one, putting differences aside and taking a deep collective breath. We pay tribute to something far bigger and more important than any one of us. And I truly feel like one of us, one of we, the people, in the echoes of the president's and other speeches. I embrace America in a way I had never thought I could, feeling for the first time that I belong, truly belong to one country. Not an imaginary ideal from TV or a nostalgic island floating in the sea of my parents' memories, but a real, tangible place that is mine, was mine all along. I turn to my mother and whisper, "Mama, I think we're finally Americanos." She gives me a tender look as if saying, "I know. I know." Senator Schumer introduces me and calls me up to the podium. My mother squeezes my shoulder. I stand more confident than I imagined I would or could be. Transfixed by the moment that is no longer about me or my poem or my glory, but about our country. Still, I'm surprised when the president and vice president stand up to greet me and shake my hand on the way to the podium. They both whisper something in my ear that I can't make out. But their gracious gestures speak silently to my heart, silently, as if saying, "Richard, here is your country. This is your story. Here, your home." I step up to the podium, look out over the crowd, a patchwork quilt of lives, of stories spread across our ground, under our sky, beneath our one sun. I take it all in as I take one deep breath and then another. This is for them. This is for us. This is for all of us. I think to myself, and begin speaking into our wind. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, America, one today. One sun rose on us today, kindled over our shores, peeking over the smokings, greeting the faces of the Great Lakes, spreading a simple truth across the Great Plains, then charging over the Rockies. One light, waking up rooftops, under each one a story, told by our silent gestures, moving behind windows. My face, your face. Millions of faces in morning's mirrors, each one yawning to life, crescendoing into our day. Pencil yellow school buses, the rhythm of traffic lights, fruit stands, apples, limes, and oranges, arrayed like rainbows, begging our praise. Silver trucks, heavy with oil or paper, bricks or milk, teeming over highways alongside us, on our way to clean tables, read ledgers, or save lives. to teach geometry or ring up groceries as my mother did for 20 years so I could write this poem for us today. All of us. As vital as the one light we move through. The same light on blackboards with lessons for the day, equations to solve, history to question, or atoms imagined. The I have a dream, we keep dreaming. Or the impossible vocabulary of sorrow that won't explain the empty deaths of 20 children marked absent today and forever. Many prayers. But one light, breathing color into stained glass windows, life into the faces of bronze statues, warmth onto the steps of our museums and park benches as mothers watch their children slide into the day. One ground, our ground, rooting us to every stalk of corn, every head of wheat sown by sweat and hands, hands gleaning coal or planting windmills in deserts and hilltops that keep us warm, hands digging trenches, hands routing pipes and cables, hands as worn as my father's, cutting sugar cane, so my brother and I could have books and shoes. The dust of our farms and deserts, our cities and plains mingled by one wind, our breath. Breathe. Hear it through the day's gorgeous din of honking cabs, buses launching down avenues, the symphony of footsteps, guitars, and screeching subways, the unexpected songbird on your clothesline. Hear squeaky playground swings, trains whistling or whispers across cafe tables. Hear the doors we open for each other all day, saying, hello, shalom, buongiorno, howdy, namaste, or buenos dias. In the language my mother taught me, in every language, spoken into one wind, carrying our lives without prejudice, as these words break from my lips. One sky, since the Appalachians and Sierras claim to their majesty, and the Mississippi and Colorado work their way to the sea, thank the work of our hands, weaving steel into bridges, finishing one more report for the boss on time, stitching under the wound or uniform, the first brushstroke on a portrait, or the last floor on the Freedom Tower, jutting into a sky that yields to our resilience. One sky, toward which we sometimes lift our eyes, tired from work. Some days guessing at the weather of our lives. Some days giving love for love that loves you back. Sometimes praising a mother who knew how to give, or forgiving a father who couldn't give what you wanted. And so we head home. Through the gloss of rain or weight of snow, or the plum blush of dust, but always, always home. Always under one sky, our sky, and always one moon, like a silent drum tapping on every rooftop and every window of one country, all of us facing the stars and hope, a new constellation, waiting for us to map it, waiting for us to name it together. Thank you. Thank you, Lester. I'm done. Thank you, everyone. Can I stay here with you? Oh boy. That's a peep. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. We've had 164 graduates in our 25 years. They published 94 books in that period of time. But nothing can top that, right?